Good evening. Welcome to tonight's council committee meeting. My name is Matt Zimmerman. I am the council member from Ward 1, and I am chair of the committee. Besides myself tonight, we have committee members Jim Neighbor, Eric Jenkins, Mike Kemling, Steph Meyer, Justin Adrian, Mickey Sandifer is out, and Lindsay Constance. Before we begin our agenda tonight, I'd like to explain our procedures for public input. During the meeting, I will offer the opportunity for public input. If you would like to speak to the committee at any of those times, please go to the podium. I will ask you to state your name and address for the record. Then you may offer your comments. So that members of the audience can hear your comments, I would ask that you speak directly into the microphone. By policy, comments are limited to 5 minutes. After you are finished, please sign the form on the podium to ensure that we have an accurate record of your name and address. We have 4 items on the agenda this evening. The first item is to review the mitigation banking study. Since 2014, the city has paid $365,148 in stream bank and wetland credits for various projects. The city contracted with George Butler and Associates to complete a feasibility study to identify potential mitigation banking opportunities to offset future costs. Todd Trotter and Paul Miller from GBA will review findings and recommendations. And this item is for informational purposes only. Welcome, Todd and Paul.
First, Neil Holman, Parks and Recreation Director. They're going to split the study up, so the PowerPoint. So Todd Trotter will go first, and then Paul Miller, and then we'll open it up for questions. So both from GBA.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, thank you for this opportunity to present the findings of the banking study that Paul and I completed for Neil and Bert, and also present some next steps to consider moving forward. Again, the purpose of the study was to evaluate the possibility of the city establishing a city-owned, city-sponsored mitigation bank. Tonight we're going to talk about 4 kind of key steps to that process. The mitigation banking process, the banking service area, which is the geographic area where a bank sponsor can sell credits, the market status of credit sales, as well as the feasibility screening and the cost analysis that we performed in the study, the conclusions and recommendations. So how does it work? A lot of projects, whether private or public, if they impact aquatic resources, wetlands, or streams, have to get a permit from the Corps of Engineers. And if those impacts are excessive, the Corps will oftentimes require that permittee to mitigate for those and offset those impacts. The priority for the Corps is for that permittee to purchase credits from an approved mitigation bank. A mitigation bank is established when a bank sponsor enters into agreement with with the Corps, and establishes an instrument whereby they restore streams, wetlands, and by doing so, they generate credits, mitigation credits that they can sell to other permittees that are required to mitigate for their impacts. Why should the city consider this? Well, these provide aquatic natural resources that may benefit and complement a lot of the city's goals, whether it be water quality initiatives, compliance with their stormwater permits, as well as the city's other types of initiatives as well. Provide community savings is one of those, and as well, many communities, Johnson County communities, need mitigation credits for their infrastructure projects. And lastly, it will keep money and benefits within the city of Shawnee. Currently there's only one mitigation bank provider in this area, and that individual has banks in Leavenworth County as well as Miami County. So these monies are leaving Johnson County essentially. Looks like we're missing an exhibit there. Apologize for that. There was an image there showing the service area in which this bank, if it was established, would serve. And it's about 9 counties, and it's about 1,700 square miles. So past Topeka, as well as north in Atchison County. This area would also consider the lower Missouri Crooked watershed, which is down in southeast in Johnson County. So it would be a rather large area. So the service areas are watershed based. So that would be the service area where credits could be sold. The part of the study, we conducted a market demand over the last 6 years to determine, how many credits are being sold, who is purchasing those credits, and the type of mitigation that's being purchased, whether it's wetland or stream. And in that market demand, we found that there's about $672,000 annually in credit sales. About 5 acres of wetland credits and 7,300 stream credits annually. And about half of that is public entities needing mitigation credits for their projects. During this 6-year period, City of Shawnee had to purchase about 3/10 of an acre of wetland credits and 6,100 stream credits. So almost $355,000 in today's dollars for projects. And this is often an unbudgeted line item. There's a lot of preliminary engineering studies that are done that there's maybe not enough detail to know whether or not streams or wetlands are going to require mitigation. And then it's not until engineering phase where these type of things, when you're securing permits, that this kind of raises its ugly head and you're like, oh, wow, we did not plan to have to write this check, to a mitigation bank. As part of the study, we also performed a desktop city inventory of aquatic resources within the city limits. These were from National Wetland Inventory maps. These are not confirmed field aquatic resources, but it does provide a sense of how much aquatic resources are within the city. So about 69 acres of wetlands, 500,000 linear feet of streams, and 322 acres of ponds and lakes. And through our study, we also coordinated with the Corps of Engineers. Doug Burka, he handles the mitigation banking process, and so we coordinated with him, as well as the IRT, or Interagency Review Team, brought them out on site and to have them look at the areas that we had in our study to get their feedback on that. So, Paul, you want to take it from there?
So getting into the suitability screening, we started with looking at the parcel that was just east of the future community center on Woodland Road, just east of the railroad tracks, which is called the LTS track. Right now, it's just a topsoil mining operation. So that's where we started. There was 3 parcels. We found that only about half of the 92 acres was really suitable for mitigation banking. And so we had recommended, and also at the same time, the city had a quiet zones initiative that was just north of the site to close off some of the railroad crossings and the horns from Tootin there. So we added those parcels onto the study area, expanded to about 147 acres. Even with the expanded area, there's a requirement to have 25% of the credits to be what's titled in stream, which means the work has to be done in the bed of the creek channel to get the credits. The areas are kind of bluffy along the railroad and not really suitable for that. And so one of the initiatives we had was to try to make the finances of this study kind of balance out. The revenues equal the costs. To do that, we were not able to do that in the expanded area, so we suggested going north and south of the study area, up and down Mill Creek. There are many properties that are already publicly owned that wouldn't have to be purchased to provide a more economically viable opportunity to do mitigation banking. So, in summary, we ended with 365-acre study area. About half of that, 150 acres, is suitable for wetland and stream mitigation banking. There's roughly 45 parcels in that 365-acre area, and you'll see that on the next slide. So maybe a little bit hard for everybody to see, but Kansas River to the north, Shawnee Mission Parkway to the south, pretty much this expanded study area went from Shawnee Mission Parkway all the way to the Kansas River. But what we have left are the red outlines, which is the recommended management area or the area that would be included in the mitigation banking program. The orangish parcels are already owned by the city or planned to be owned by the city as part of the Quiet Crossings Initiative. The green areas are generally owned by Johnson County Parks and Recreation District. There are a couple of private parcels in there that would have to have conservation easements placed on them to include them in the management area. The table at the right summarizes the wetland credits and the stream credits that are the findings of our study. It's kind of segregated by what the city currently owns there, the top line, what they would purchase there, the middle line, and then on down into public and private easements. As I was describing before, we were not able to get a lot of stream credits on the city's parcels, and so if you look at those numbers, you can see they're quite a bit larger when you start expanding in the easement domain, especially in the stream credits, which are the ones that are the most highest demand in this watershed. So in summary, we found about 11 acres of wetland credits, almost 80,000 stream credits in this red management area, and that was the findings of what we felt was suitable in the areas that we looked at. Next, getting into the financial analysis, the top two lines describe the revenues. Again, this is broken out into city-owned or city-to-be-owned parcels on the left. The center column is the easement expansion to the north and south of the original project area. The totals are on to the right. As you can see, if you look at the bottom, total of all the expenses exceeds the revenue. The expenses include acquiring some of the land that's not currently owned by the city. Includes purchase of some of the conservation easements on private property, the planning and engineering. There's a rigorous process. It usually takes a minimum of 2 years to get Corps approval to even start a mitigation bank. So part of the planning and engineering costs are part of that instrument approval that Todd described. You have your construction, usually mass grading and some vegetation establishment. There's a 5-year period of vegetation establishment to perfect your permit, get the permit to realize the credits that you're projecting. And then there's some stewardship management costs that we've thrown in here. One of the things Neil and Bert wanted us to put in was some O&M costs. We have $5,000 per year for 25 years included in that number. That number also includes some legal costs for description of the management areas, the easements and whatnot that might need to be gone through. There's a 15% contingency that was added onto that as well to develop those numbers. So in summary, $6.2 million is what we're thinking is going to cost to implement this kind of a program. At today's rates, you'd only get about $5 million out of the revenue of the sale of those, which could go up and down. So in summary, the costs are about 24% higher than the revenue at today's rates. We think there's some reasons for that in our costs, and they're itemized there. But one thing that, some of these are assumptions that were made working with the staff to develop these costs. The construction costs already had a contingency on them, and we're adding this 15% contingency presented on the previous slide. So there may be a little bit of fluff built in, just maybe too many contingencies or lifting that number up. One of the other assumptions is the city, the staff didn't feel like that they had the staff to do self-performance of some of the tasks. Probably could be self-performed, but our directive was to assume that everything would be bid out to third parties. So there's quite a bit of management. It's not just the construction and planting the plants. There's a monitoring process. There's some management processes. There's a sales process. All these things are being assumed that would be bid out to a third party, which could also elevate some of these numbers. The land costs, Neil and Bert suggested we use $8,500 an acre, I think it was, which is what we've assumed for purchase of the city's property to do this. Not all of the property can be used for the mitigation bank, so about 130,000 in there would really be adjacent lands, would be part of the purchase, probably become part of the park project. But there's some costs in there that are really not attributable to the actual revenues that are included in these estimates. So, you know, some of our recommendations here follow and based on what we found, and one of the big things are the ecosystem services that Todd touched on. You know, we were not able at that time to make it a break-even project, but there's some intangibles here that should be considered related to natural resource protection. Drinking water. The drinking water source for all of Johnson County is just downstream of Mill Creek, where all this water dumps into. So, you know, these things are kind of hard to put a dollar amount to, of what value they bring the community. And so we think that the council and the committee should consider those types of things instead of just economic, if you're considering this kind of a project. One of the other things we think that could be done, should be done, to reduce some of the costs. We evaluated 17 potential grant cost share programs provided as part of the study that we did. We think partnering up with local businesses and also local organizations like Johnson County Parks that are already kind of included in this management area makes a lot of sense. It's something that's going to help you be more qualified for these grants and probably give you a much higher chance of doing it. Water One in Johnson County is another one that was identified. There's some ways to offset some of these costs by creating some, being creative on some of the partnerships. This kind of business is not without risk. I mentioned that it takes a couple of years just to get Corps approval. And the regulation seems to be getting picked on all the time. Right now, it doesn't look like anything's going to change for a couple of years, but there is a regulatory risk at the federal level that could change the way that the impacts are viewed, which then could impact the viability or the market demand of these credits. So right now it's status quo, and the market numbers that Todd had presented. We think this project, if you were to sell all of the credits, all of the impacts in this watershed would last about 2 years, only about 2 years for the wetlands, but over 10 years for stream impacts. And that's considering not just city projects, but county projects, private development, anything that would happen in the watershed. As I also mentioned, there's sales negotiation, there's some management things that need to go on in the background to sort of sell the credits. You've got to have somebody that's willing to put those contracts together, negotiate on behalf of the city, and that sort of thing. So, you know, what are the next steps? This part wasn't really part of the report, but it was something that Neil and Bert asked us to add into the presentation. So again, we think there's some partnering that could be done, but even before you get there, we did the study to try to find the suitable areas that were identified along Mill Creek that could be done, but it was based on, you know, trying to meet some market demands, but that may not be what's in line with what the city wants out of the project. I know that being next to the park, there's some goals there that are probably trying to be attained, and we think just defining some very basic things that the city would want out of it should be done before you try to go to the next step, because these are things that we can really help massage the costs down if we define what they are instead of just we want to get as much as we can get. If we can define how much do you need, how much do you want, how long do you want it to last, how long do you want to be in this business, those kinds of questions will help, I think, reduce some of the costs. Seeking an internal champion for leadership and organization. Bert and Neil have done a great job getting us to this point. But I've hit several times in my discussion here tonight about the passion and follow through that needs to happen. You really got to have somebody who's going to stay on top of it for a while. There's some sales things that go on. There's some management and administrative things that go on with trying to keep the thing afloat. And you really need somebody who has some passion and some negotiating skills to run through that portion of it. Another idea that we've tossed around is having a private partnership. This is a great way to reduce costs, but there are some possible regulatory hurdles related to private use on public lands that need to be vetted out with probably the legal staff of the city before you try to jump into that kind of an arrangement. One way to kind of avoid some of that is consider a qualification-based selection for possibly a management team that would help the city get the instrument approved, manage the bank, help perform some of the credit sales functions, and some of the management things that need to go on in the first 5 to 6 years on the land. A fifth option that we really didn't explore in the report, but it is an option. Cities and nonprofits can do an in lieu fee program, which is similar to mitigation banking, but you don't have to build the mitigation bank before you sell the credits. So it's kind of a thing that you can phase in. If you had a project that Neiman Road, you're going to improve Neiman Road, you need to buy some credits. With that program, you could buy credits into the in lieu fee program, but then you're promising to build something that replaces those credits later. And so it becomes a structured agreement that you're doing in phases. That would be a way to also kind of reduce some of the costs and keep it in a phase thing where maybe you could look at all of your capital improvements, decide what kind of expenditures you're going to have like that, and then try to phase it in. Another thing that's not on here that we wanted to touch base on is when we did the study, when we completed the study, right after we completed the study, actually, the state of Kansas changed the rules a little bit on the in-stream credits, which I think I had mentioned earlier in the presentation. When we did the study, you had to have 25% of the credits in-stream, in the creek. Since we've completed this study, that's been eliminated. And you don't have to do that anymore. That's another way to reduce some of the costs. Throughout the study, we kept expanding the area to try to achieve that. And now that that's not a requirement, there's ways that I think you could significantly reduce the cost to try to get rid of that requirement. So with that, we'll open it up to questions. And I think that's the end of our presentation.
All right, thank you, Todd. Thank you, Paul. Questions, discussions? Mr. Jenkins.
Yes, I had a couple questions. The first one, what is the regulation that places the requirements on wetlands, on these wetland permits and the offsets and so on? Is that EO 11990, or is that some kind of legislative piece, or?
Yeah, it's Section 404 of the Clean Water Act.
404? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Corps is responsible for administrating that. So any fills within stream or wetlands, you have to have that.
Okay.
404.
The other question was, all this construction, I was a real proponent of this. I thought, wow, this is great. We could sell these credits and make money like Al Gore or something, selling carbon credits. But it doesn't sound so great when I see what your bottom line looks like here. And I'm very disappointed in that because I was really excited about it. The construction cost, I guess I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around the construction cost of what all do you have to do out there to make this so you can use it as a credit. Sounds like a lot of work, like over $3 million in construction.
Yeah, the in-stream work is considerable when it comes to construction. There's also quite a bit of cost in reestablishing these riparian corridors. There's thousands of feet of stream corridor that we're proposing to restore. So a lot of those construction is plantings and trees and maintaining those, and creation and grading of the wetland areas as well. So a lot of construction involved with that.
Seemed like you'd have a hard time even breaking even at best on this. If, assuming we were able to do some of those mitigating strategies that would bring the cost down a little bit, we're still gonna be pressed really hard to even try to get those to even break even. It is, and then you got the aggravation, you gotta dedicate staff to it, and as all I said,
It's a challenge.
looks like we, looks like we didn't get anywhere with this actually, but I appreciate your work. I mean, we need that information, obviously, so we can't make a decision without it, but it sure didn't come out the way I was hoping it would. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Constance?
Intangibles, you mentioned clean drinking water. What are some other examples of those? And then also you mentioned kind of a connection with some things that Parks is already doing that might kind of benefit those initiatives.
So, you know, in the study, we list these out, and I can just kind of read them off, but
Yeah.
again, the value of creating these things adjacent to your parks and your open spaces. So it's going to enhance recreation. It creates some educational opportunities as well. A lot of the grants that are available are exactly for that, environmental education, putting kiosks and stuff on the trail, telling the public what the wetlands do, and also some of the other things that we had thought about. There can be a political advantage to having these in the city. Example, a large corporation wants to locate, they're looking at several different cities. Maybe Shawnee's one of them. Maybe they're looking at a parcel of land that has a lot of mitigation needs on it. It's expensive to develop because they have a creek they have to enclose, they have a pond they want to fill in. The city owning those credits might be able to offer that as part of a package deal. So you have some capital there that you could use in different ways in attracting new businesses. Integrating into the stormwater management goals, that's, you know, the city's under the NPDS program. You have to monitor the outfalls. There's some TMDLs associated with that as far, and what that means is total daily maximum load. So the amount of sediment that goes down Mill Creek. And the city's right now has an initiative that you're paying your staff to kind of monitor this stuff. This would be a thing that you could show progress in that and add another bullet into that program that this is another thing you're doing to layer on top of that so that it's consistent with that. Permitting time, reduced permitting time. As Todd mentioned, a lot of times you get into these projects, you don't realize that you have to do this until you're trying to start construction. And you don't want to wait, you know, to secure and come to the council again to ask to write another check to get the thing started because you don't have the mitigation credit. So having it in-house, you're able to just turn it right around so you can accelerate some of your construction projects that way. There is a green infrastructure component to this, which is also just compounds the grant funding and infrastructure funding that's available, being able to say that. And again, the drinking water source, the public health values that are there, having the drinking water source just downstream, we think is a real opportunity. I don't think it would be hard to convince Water One to team up with you on a deal like this. And just the political and socioeconomic values of trying to team with other parts of the Johnson County government or the adjacent landowners. You know, some of these parcels, the adjacent landowners be asked to put a conservation easement on there. There's potentially some tax advantages, incentives that could be offered by doing that. So hopefully that answers your question.
One question from the chair. You had quite a bit of contingencies in there, and it sounded like you mentioned at one time you had actually stacked some contingencies on top of contingencies. So from the perspective of an estimator, are you conservative when you estimate? Are you aggressive?
I think we're really conservative. You know, the reason I pointed that out is because when we did the original estimates, we had put a 20% contingency on all of the construction and implementation costs, which are really the biggest unknown for us. I mean, some of the other costs in those tables we're pretty familiar with and have a good handle on. but the construction, not knowing the timing and when you're going to build, and we're doing a study, so that things are kind of loosely defined. We felt pretty comfortable with that, but during the last draft, it was suggested we try to add contingencies onto the total costs, not knowing really when it would be implemented. So there could be some inflationary costs that contingency is adding onto. Also, we did not have really a dedicated line item for some of the legal issues, the legal help that we thought we might need to develop the instrument. And so that was also being considered when we added the contingency in.
And then in the spirit of the same question, I think you indicated that there's been a very recent change in rules about, you talking about stream side credits and a reduction in the construction expense or something. You mentioned that. So that's going to drive the cost down a little bit more. Can you speak to that?
Right.
Again?
So again, the land that we're looking at along Mill Creek, everybody's seen it. Everybody's probably been down the trail. It's kind of on a bluff there up against the railroad. So bluffs are not really suitable for creating wetlands because it's rocky. We want deep soils. And so the only stream credits we were really able to define are on Mill Creek. Mill Creek has 35-foot sheer walls on it. It's very expensive to do stream bank stabilization on those. So those are really driving a lot of the costs that we have in the study to try to get those in-stream credits. And so since we don't have that requirement anymore, lopping some of those off will significantly reduce the cost. Some of those are $1 million projects, just the stream bank stabilization part. And so I think looking at that would have a big impact on what that revenue cost ratio is.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes.
I'll just add a little bit of my own commentary here. I was interested when Eric proposed the idea of potentially making money off these credits a little while back, but I have a little bit of reservation, just like he does on this, that we're going to spend $6.2 million to develop something we could buy for $5 million. And that's a 24% markup. And so I have a little bit of hesitation, a little bit of reservation on it. We're not guaranteed we're going to get them. We don't know how things are going to change. Things have already changed since our study started. So, yeah, there's some intangibles here. I don't know if that, for me, justifies the financial risk or the reward. So just my commentary.
Lindsay?
Is it possible to get information about the amount of grant funding that is available? You mentioned lots of different sources. Is that significant or?
We just outlined at the time what was available. This stuff changes all the time due to appropriations. Every time there's a new appropriations, many of them are federal grants that are tied to the EPA. If they cut funding to the EPA, the program goes away or it's not funded that year. So it's kind of a case-by-case thing, and it's hard to answer that question without looking at very specific programs. But we do have an outline of, like I said, 17 possible ways.
17.
Any more comments from council? Is there anyone from the public that would care to speak to the issue? All right. Seeing that there is none, this is information only. No action needs to be taken. We're going to move on to the second item. Second item to review is the traffic improvement plan. The traffic improvement plan was first presented to the City Council on December 6, 2016. The plan offers a multifaceted approach which will improve both traffic flow and safety through the city. Transportation Manager Kevin Manning will provide an update on the plan's progress. Welcome, Kevin.
Good evening. As you said, my name is Kevin Manning. I'm the Transportation Manager for the city, and I'm here tonight to give an update on the traffic improvement plan, which was originally presented to the Council Committee in December of 2016. So to give you a little bit of background, this plan was originally developed in response to the 2015 City of Shawnee Citizen Satisfaction Survey. Part of that survey, based on feedback from residents, there were city priorities that were developed. And the second one on that list was the flow of traffic and congestion management. So that was really kind of the impetus to start developing this plan. since 2015, we've obviously had another citizen survey in 2017, and this item dropped to number 3, but it is still really a top priority for the city, and that's really why this plan was developed and why we're continuing to move forward with its implementation. So the plan really consists of 4 different items, and I'm going to cover each one of these in turn tonight and kind of give you an update on where we're at on each one. First item is traffic operations. Second is safety analysis, and our ADA transition plan, and finally, public involvement. So to begin with, on traffic operations, this is a map of our roadway network within the city, and it shows you that we have lots of different types of streets. We have residential streets, we have collectors, arterials, and freeways, and all of these roads really have a different part to play. Our residential streets allow access to homes. Our collectors gather that traffic from residential streets and allow for intermediate trips without putting pressure on the arterials. And our arterials allow, obviously, travel at higher speeds and longer distances throughout the city and outside the city if people are looking to go to work or shop or eat. So this is a map of all of our signalized locations at the end of 2016. The red stars indicate locations that we had signal interconnect to, and the blue stars indicate locations we did not. And really a big part of our improvement plan is getting more signal connectivity, and there's a lot of benefits to doing this. First of all, it allows us to really start implementing signal coordination times, which can have a lot of benefits, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. It also allows us to be a lot more proactive with the status of our signals and any detector malfunctions. If we have connectivity to a signal and the signal goes on flash or loses power, we can know it instantaneously rather than waiting for a call from either a city employee or a resident. Having that connectivity also allows us the ability to harvest a lot of data. At our locations we have connectivity to, we can actually see by time of day per cycle basically how many vehicles are going through an intersection and like how much green time they're using each individual cycle. So for instance, at Shawnee Mission Parkway in Neiman, if the westbound left turn is essentially maxing out every single cycle during a time of day, we can see that and say, maybe we need to give that location a little bit extra time. So there's a ton of information out there. We're not necessarily utilizing all of it right now, but we're making progress towards that. And that's really why we're looking to build out our system and get connectivity to more of our signals. So this is where we are at right now. From December 2016 to February of 2018, we've been able to connect an additional 18 locations. And that is in large part due to the great work our IT staff have done building out our fiber network. We need to have that. We need to have some kind of activity, whether it's fiber or wireless or some other sort of communication system to have that connectivity to our signals. And that's really been a big part of how we've been able to get up to 32. So we're making a lot of progress over the last 14 months, but we still have some progress to go. I included this slide in my original presentation, but I wanted to discuss it again. This is a graph showing the percentage of connected traffic signals that we have compared with our neighbors. Olathe, Lenexa, and Overland Park all have about 93 to 98% of their signals connected. And at the end of 2016, we were at about 23%. So we were, quite a bit behind. Since then, we've moved up to about 53%. So I think we're making great progress. I still think we have a ways to go. I'd really like to see us more up in the 80, 90%. I don't think we're ever going to get to 100%. There's always going to be a few locations where maybe they're kind of removed a little bit. It's hard to get to. It's expensive to get that connectivity, but we still have plenty of locations that it's not going to be extremely expensive to get to, and we're going to see a lot of benefit by having that connectivity. So this is a map kind of showing where I'd like to be by the end of 2019. This is not a guarantee by any means. We're still exploring some different options on how we're going to get here, but I know our IT staff has been working diligently with the DeSoto School District as well as the City of Lenexa, and I believe we're going to have a fiber connection on the southwest corner of the city soon that's actually going to run through Lenexa. So we're going to be able to connect the 3 signals along 83rd Street this year, and we're also looking at eventually having a connection up to Monticello and Shawnee Mission Parkway, which will kind of allow us a starting point to get those signals on the west side connected. And as you all know, Water One is also looking at putting in a water tower near the service center, and as part of that, we will also be installing some conduit, and hopefully, if it's funded at some point in the future, we'll get some fiber in there and that'll allow us the opportunity to connect a lot of those signals on the west side of the city. So I wanted to give you an example, too, of some of the benefits we can really see from this. I did have the opportunity, we've kind of installed some legacy GPS time clock devices on Shawnee Mission Parkway from Hilltop to Midland, and these basically help sync those traffic signals. We don't get a lot of the other benefits I discussed, like a lot of the data or the ability to control those signals remotely, which is what we're working to, but this allows us to at least implement some new coordination timings. And what you see here are basically travel times in the AM and PM peak, both eastbound and westbound. And we've seen some pretty dramatic improvements as a result of these going in. In the AM peak eastbound, we've seen about a 36% reduction in travel time. Westbound in the AM peak, about a 17% reduction. In the PM peak eastbound, we've had a 31% reduction. And westbound, we've seen about a 40% reduction. So these are pretty significant improvements. I'm really pleased to see it. We're not going to see these types of improvements everywhere. Those four signals out west are kind of an ideal corridor to coordinate. We have a lot of space. We have good spacing between signals. We don't have a lot of access points. So we're going to see some good improvements out there. We're not necessarily going to see those more in a location where we have a lot of access points, a lot of people turning in and out. But the end result of these improvements is that during the AM and PM peak periods every day, our residents are saving around 60 hours in travel times every single day. So I think that's something that I'm very pleased with, and I think is really a testament to some of the improvements we can see by connecting more of our signals. Moving on to safety analysis. When we are looking at crashes at intersections, each intersection kind of falls into one of these four quadrants. What we're really looking for in the green are locations where we have a higher crash rate or we have high crash severity, and there are low-cost countermeasures that we feel like we can implement and have a good chance of reducing that rate. Then obviously kind of our middle tier locations where maybe we have a high crash rate, but to address that it's going to be very expensive, or locations where maybe we have a lower crash rate, but there's some simple things we can do to lower that. And obviously we're not looking to necessarily spend a lot of money at locations where we don't have really a crash problem, and to reduce that at all would be expensive. So some of the things we're looking at when we talk about crash countermeasures can be signing, pavement marking, and lighting. Some of this is fairly intuitive. If I'm looking at crashes at an intersection and 75% of those crashes are at night, maybe there's a lighting problem there. Maybe there's some kind of an issue there where we can go out, modify the lighting in an intersection and see an improvement there. Or if there's a location where people are running a stop sign, maybe instead of a 30-inch stop sign, we install a 36 or a 48-inch stop sign. The solution isn't necessarily complicated. It's identifying the problem across the entire city that can sometimes be complex. So when I'm looking at these types of countermeasures too, I also look at what the expected reduction in crash rate is going to be. There's been a lot of research done nationally that's been kind of incorporated into a technical document called the Highway Safety Manual. And a lot of that research has been done more on freeways or arterials. So let's say if you're on 435 and you increase your shoulder width from 6 feet to 12 feet, you could probably see a certain amount of reduction based on that research. There hasn't been as much of that done in more residential or collector areas, and so that's still, it's hard to quantify sometimes what that reduction is actually going to be, but we have a pretty good sense that some of these countermeasures are going to reduce crashes, and I'm going to talk about one example here. So this is a roundabout out at K7 and Johnson Drive, and I know everyone's not a huge fan of roundabouts. I'm an advocate for them, but just looking at this, we had a particular problem in the northwest corner of the intersection. And this was in 2016. We had about 9 crashes. And what was really happening here was there was some confusion when people were going around the roundabout, wanted to go south on the K7. We were going westbound on Johnson Drive, wanted to go south, what lane they should really be in. Some people were staying in the inside lane and exiting from the inside lane and getting into crashes. Some people were staying in the right lane as they went around, because typically if you exit onto a highway, you're exiting from the right lane, not the left lane. That was causing some confusion. You know, you look at this, there's clearly a problem there. So what we went out and took a look at it, and what we did was, maybe a little tough to see here, but we added just a little bit of striping. And what that did was, as you're traveling westbound in the inside lane, that striping forced you into the outside lane as you went around. So it provided clarity to people on what they were supposed to do when they were going around the roundabout. And the end result, this is in 2017. At this particular corner, we've gone from 9 crashes to 1. So this is an example of a location where, and I will say the good thing about roundabouts is you noticed, I'll go back a few slides, yellow indicates basically property damage only. There were no injuries. Roundabouts generally, at a typical signalized intersection, your really severe clashes are like a T-bone when you're getting hit at 90 degrees. At roundabouts, they're designed so most of your crashes are more side swipes, so they're never going to be as severe. So that's the good news, but that doesn't mean we can still go out and make improvements. And we went from 9 crashes to 1 in basically 1 year. And this is a good example of something that took a few hours of my time, a few hours of staff time to go out, and just a little bit of material, and we saw a pretty significant decline in crashes. So next I want to talk about our ADA transition plan. And once again, just a little background. This is in response to the American with Disabilities Act that was passed in 1990, and the regulations behind that went into effect in 1992. And really, it's important to comply with this to ensure that the city retains control of their transportation funding dollars. There's been several municipalities or other entities in the Kansas City area and certainly nationwide that have had a visit from the Justice Department and had to enter into basically an agreement saying that they will spend a certain amount of their money every year improving these issues. And usually those agreements are punitive. It takes money away from other things the city could be doing and really makes you focus on these issues. So we don't want to lose that flexibility. We want to make sure we get out in front of this and make sure we are documenting what's wrong and have a plan in place on how we're going to address these issues. So this year, what we have done so far is to, first of all, develop a checklist. And this checklist is essentially ensuring compliance with the Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines, also known by its acronym PROWAG. And these are basically a fairly complex set of federal regulations that are actually still in rulemaking form, so they are not final yet. They've actually been in rulemaking form for several years. However, it is basically the consensus in the engineering community that will essentially become the standard at some point. And so that is the standard we are looking to when we are evaluating our signalized intersections, but also just all of our intersections and sidewalk curb ramps throughout the city. We have completed inspecting all of our signalized intersections and documenting everything that's wrong. And really in 2018, the next step in this process is we start ranking locations and kind of coming up with a plan. And to be clear, this is not a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. This is going to be more like a 20 or 30-year plan. This is going to be a major long-term focus for the city that we're going to have to chip away at. We're not going to be able to take care of all these things short-term, but we will have a plan in place which will help us make decisions as we're looking at projects. And really, the most important thing here is if we ever get a concern from a resident about an issue that's not ADA compliant, we want to make sure that we address it and not let it, not let the can get kicked down the road, because other cities have had issues where they basically have had repeated requests from residents, never addressed it. And that's when you really get in trouble, when someone comes in and says, you've known about this for 4 or 5 years, haven't done anything. Now we're going to make sure it gets taken care of. That's what we want to avoid. So the final portion of our plan. As a traffic engineer, I obviously have my perspective on a lot of these issues, but we also want to make sure we involve the public because they're going to have a different perspective. I certainly can't be everywhere. City employees can't be everywhere. And the public drives these roads every day. And so I'm currently working on developing a public survey on traffic issues. We want to hear what the public thinks about different things and make sure that's incorporated into the plan. So that survey is going to be complete by the end of the first quarter in 2018. I'm going to be working with the city's communication manager to get that sent out. And we'll take a look at the results in the second quarter and really start to develop themes. And those themes may line up pretty well with some of my plans, and there may be some differences there. And we'll work through if there are differences, we'll work through that and make sure whatever those survey themes are that if we have intersections that maybe need to be moved up or down the list or different improvements, we can do that. We'll make sure that gets incorporated into our overall plan. So in summary, this plan was really developed based on feedback from the 2015 citizen survey and consists of traffic operations, safety analysis, our ADA transition plan, and public involvement. I hope I gave you a little bit of an idea of what kind of progress we made in all these areas, and I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. That's good stuff. Any conversation, discussion, questions from the council? Mr. Kemling.
Yeah, Kevin, real quick, I had a question. You had that first map that listed all the city's intersections and how many were connected.
Yes.
14 out of 61, right? And then your next slide is 32 out of 61. What was the time difference between those two?
14 months.
14 months. Okay. And then will you go to your next slide again? Oh, yep.
This
Go
one?
back. No, go back one. Oh, sorry, the one that shows Lenexa, Overland Park. And,
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, that one. Are theirs all connected by fiber, or how are theirs?
It depends by city, and a lot of Overland Park has a huge amount of fiber, and Lenexa does as well. Overland Park Lenexa and Overland Park have large fiber networks. Olathe not as much, but I'm not precisely sure. But I would guess that. I won't guess, but they have pretty large fiber networks, but I can certainly find out and get a better idea if you'd be interested to
Yeah,
see
if you
how
would.
much they have on fiber and how much they have on other communication networks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions, comments from council?
I'm sorry.
Going up from 34 to 49.
Yeah, 34 to 49, 2019. And yeah, once again, this is not I'm not going to guarantee this is what we're working towards. There's several factors that are going to be behind whether we can get there. And some of that depends on, are we going to be able to get fiber to certain locations? Are we willing to use a different alternative to get that connectivity? We're going to have to make those decisions, and work through it from a budget perspective. But this is within the ballpark of what we could do. Yeah, I mean, the eastern side has a lot more connectivity right now. I mean, the issue has always been getting over 435. I mean, we have fiber to the service center right now, and that's why I think we've come up with a kind of unique solution actually coming up through Lenexa. And the first signals that actually have connectivity on the west side of the city will likely be down at 83rd Street, but that'll kind of allow us a back door to get into the west side of the city.
And Kevin, for my own interest and edification, I assume you share a lot of this information with our neighboring communities, Lenexa and Merriam. How is the dialogue of traffic safety between neighboring communities?
Yeah, I mean, we work really close. I work really closely with my counterparts in Johnson County, and then also a kind of a great resource across the Kansas City area is Operation Greenlight. They're basically a organization that's part of Mid-America Regional Council, and they were basically formed probably close to 10 years ago to help start coordinating corridors across city lines. Because what was happening a lot in the past was that each kind of city was looking at what was best for their community. And so you may have a situation where, let's say on Shawnee Mission Parkway, you're running a 90-second cycle length, and then you go over to Merriam, you're running a 100-second cycle length. Well, that basically means you don't have any coordination between the two cities. And so instead of looking at what was best for each community, OGL was kind of able to come in as kind of a neutral figure and look at what's best for the entire corridor. And they've just been really an outstanding partner for not just Shawnee, but also the entire region in improving traffic flow.
Cool. Thank you. Any more questions from council? Comments? Any questions, comments from the public? Very well. Kevin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
No action necessary on that particular item. We are going to move on to item number 3, our feature presentation for the evening. Discuss Widmer Road from Johnson Drive to 62nd Street. A senior housing development called Veterans Park is being proposed for Flum and 62nd Street, between Flum and 62nd Street. Improvements and dedication of right-of-way for the Widmer Road would be required as part of that development. The developer has asked the council for input before continuing with plans. Development Services Director Doug Wesselschmidt will make a presentation, and then the development group is here tonight, and I believe Pat McEnany is going to speak on their behalf as well. We will then take comments from the public. I'd like to note that we are not considering the project at this time. This is only a discussion about the road, the Widmer Road improvement, and only that. If the proposed development were to move forward, it would have to be considered by the Planning Commission first. So with that duly stated, welcome, Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the audience, Doug Wesselschmidt, Director of Development Services and City Engineer.
Kevin Manning, our traffic transportation manager, started off with a good lead-in of one specific location that we're going to be talking about tonight. But his first slide he showed was the city circulation plan, which showed where arterial streets are, collector streets, and he talked about the function of those, where residentials going to collector streets in arterials, and the arterials tying into our freeways, and in reverse order back to the homes. Also, another component that we have in our city is called the comprehensive plan, which is a plan for the city that if it was completely developed, where would residential areas be, where would commercial areas be. Those are generally two separate documents that are tied to each other. What I have on the screen is one of the older comprehensive plans that, at least that I've come across, is from 1978. What we had back in that day was both the circulation plan and the comprehensive plan was on the same document. I'm going to zoom in. This is zoomed in the area that we're talking about tonight, with this being Johnson Drive right here, Flum Road over here, Shawnee Mission Parkway over here, and then Lackman Road for those that have been in the community for a long time. This identifies a private ballpark that is now Hy-Vee, so get our bearings there. You have to go back in the day to remember what existed before Hy-Vee. And then at that time, some of these shopping centers were just getting not really developed, but at least planned at that point. So what this plan, again, back in 1978, took a look at where some existing subdivisions were, as well as where some planned roads would be. So again, it was identifying Johnson Drive as an arterial, Flum Road as an arterial, and then in this area, it identified this street, which basically lines up with Widmer today, and this would be the Lakeview Estates before Lakeview Estates existed. So it showed some type of a north-south collector tying into 55th Street over there, and this depicted in comprehensive plans still shows it somewhat differently, but how Lackman would extend all the way to the north of Johnson Drive and tie into the Lake Revere area. But again, right here is 63rd Street showing a future Widmer Road. This is a vicinity map, a little small, but I'll try to identify it because we're going to make a lot of references to different subdivisions on there. In yellow is the Timber Oak subdivision. Pink is the Widmer Woods subdivision. This somewhat, I'm going to call it turquoise, is the Milk Creek subdivision. The lightest blue is the development area, or the proposed development area. And this subdivision is Governor Square, I believe is what it's called. So again, to get your bearing, Johnson Drive is up here. Flum Road is over here, Shawnee Mission Parkway, 63rd Street, and then Widmer Road as it aligns there. I'm going to stay on that just to kind of tie some time frames to this. So the Mill Creek subdivision went in the mid-1970s. It put in the streets as we see it today. It took Albert Van up to this point here, ended there. Also, it just put a short section of Widmer in. And I'm going to identify two other properties because we'll make reference to them yet this evening. When I make reference to the Dudley property, Mrs. Dudley owns the one house on the corner, and she owns this area right here. And then this area right here is where Mr. Chalk lives. So we'll probably make reference to Mr. Chalk, and I believe Mr. Chalk is in the audience, and he'll probably want to speak tonight. I guess, let me also identify what roads that we have in at this point. Widmer Road goes from Johnson Drive through the Timber Oak subdivision and stops right here at the edge of the Widmer Woods subdivision. And then Widmer comes Widmer comes from Shawnee Mission Parkway to 63rd Street, 63rd Street up to 62nd. And then from there, it is a public road just short of Mr. Chalk's property. This portion through here is very minimal maintenance that the city provides, basically because it just provides access to Mr. Chalk's property. So I don't know, probably very few people go down there at this point. And again, it is minimally maintained by the city since it just goes to one residence. But again, the Mill Creek subdivision went in the mid-1970s, and then Timber Oaks went in the late 1970s, early 80s. What it did was extended Widmer from Johnson Drive down to its south line of its development, and also it put in Albervan up the hill and tied into where Albervan ended with the Mill Creek subdivision. And the Greenwood Square, which was this area over here, went into the late 70s, early 80s, 1980s. And then the Widmer Woods subdivision went in the early 1990s and extended Widmer Road down to the kind of south and east line of its ownership. Certainly, as developments took place in that area, this was a little history, but back in the 1979, when the Timber Oaks subdivision was going in, you got to kind of think back in that day too, is Johnson Drive was probably just a 2-lane road, steeper grades than what it is today. So there were some concerns about how this development was going to have access, knowing that, it was going to tie into Albervan, but Albervan was going to end up being a steep street itself. So there was some discussion when you look back in the minutes about alternate access other than Johnson Drive and Albervan to get to the Timber Oak subdivision. So it made provisions, and with a sketch by the developer's engineer showing that Timber Oaks is here, but then it showed how the future street, again, reflecting what was on the circulation comprehensive plan on how Widmer would continue further to the south. This is a note with respect to when the Widmer Woods subdivision came in, because when it came in, it added additional lots to Widmer in addition to what Timber Oaks already had. So there was quite a bit of discussion with that development as it came in that, okay, we're going to have up to about 50 lots that only have one way in and one way out. But as Paul Chaffee, our city planner's note to the mayor at that time, who raised some concerns, is that, well, the temporary turnaround at the end of Widmer was just a temporary situation, and as a future development would occur, then that would provide a second way in to the Widmer Woods subdivision. This is, and again, as the chairman noted, we're not here to discuss what type of uses and how things are going to lay out on the proposed developer's layout, but generally this is what they have presented to staff at this point. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the west side of that, where they're showing And this is 62nd Street, which is on the north side of Hy-Vee, Widmer, going into its unimproved state down to Mr. Chalk's house, and then Widmer coming up, right now ending in this temporary turnaround. So what the development group is showing is that, some streets over here with their residential product on that side, and what they came to staff with was, I need to back up a little bit, in between when Widmer Woods came in, I guess, and when what we're talking about today, there was two developments that were proposed, the Cobblestone development and the Vantage development, that were generally multifamily developments. And so there was quite a bit of discussion back at the time that they came in, which was about 2007, 2008, about the need for Widmer Road. The direction that the council gave those developments was that, since it was generally a multifamily product without any access onto Widmer Road, and a lot of input from residents back at that time, the direction to those developments was that that development would not have to put in Widmer Road. And matter of fact, it talked about vacating a portion of the right-of-way on the east side of Widmer Road. So when the current development team came in, they were going off of that direction given to those two previous developments about not putting in Widmer Road. So staff, with discussions with the current development group, said, well, with it being a different type of residential product, we felt that at least what staff's recommendation was that they improve the north side of 62nd Street and go back and improve the east side of Widmer, and then provide right-of-way, so at some point in the future, with future development or perhaps some type of a city-at-large project, Widmer could be connected through that. What staff took a little bit of liberty and took a look at if Widmer did go through, and with concerns about seeing that the Dudley property could be developed as well, we kind of laid out a portion of the same development, showing how if Widmer went through, then you could get development on both sides of Widmer, and then with some a different layout of the streets within that development, creating the same number of lots that the development team was showing there. So again, staff's recommendation is that that Widmer be provided for, improvements made to it with this development. There's a number of reasons for that. One of the biggest concerns is that with the 50, or just short of 50, I think it's 46 lots that only have one way in, one way out. If there was some utility break, some type of a fire incident that would cut off a number of homes for a long period of time without one way in or one way out. Also, the International Fire Code requires that if any development or any residential development that has more than 30 homes on it have more than one way in and one way out. And so one exception made to that is that if there's provisions made for continuing that street in the future. So that was the assumption we were going with when Widmer Woods came in, was that, yeah, we were getting over that 30 lot limit, but there were provisions made for a road in the future. So again, as the chairman stated, and the information included in the packet, is we have a development group that's taken a look at this. They're having conflicting opinions with the city staff, and before they went any further with it, they would want to get some direction on the council's opinion of the need for Widmer Road.
All right, thank you, Doug. Any questions from council for Mr. Wesselschmidt? Mr. Jenkins?
Yeah, when I was reading the stuff, Doug, it said something in the packet here about it being approximately $1 million to do this Widmer improvement, to have that go through. And I think there was some mention of $300,000, sharing the cost, $300,000 with a future developer, say this developer came in, is that correct?
Yeah, and just run a real, I was just basically using $1,000 per lineal foot for a collector standard road to go from this point here to this point here. If you take a look at just the portion, the one-sided portion of adjacent to that development, prorate that out, it's about $300,000.
So if the city were to do it all, because say the developer changed their mind, didn't want to do that, then it would cost us $1 million of city funds to do this, and it does not qualify for CARS or any of the other funding support programs out there. And if they did come in on it, the city's looking at putting up $700,000 for this project. Is that correct?
Right. There would also be some.
Approximately.
Right. And there would be some opportunity as additional development would occur on that street excise taxes, reimbursing that cost down the line.
That's some pretty rough terrain down there. I went down and looked, and it'd be interesting to see if anybody want to develop that. But
yeah, to be CARS eligible, there needs to be 3,500 vehicles a day on that. And let me just touch on some traffic counts. There's approximately 570, or when we counted them, 570 vehicles per day on Widmer. And we estimated that if the road would go through, then of course that would increase to, I think our number was 1,270. To just get some reference to that, Widmer just north of Johnson Drive through the Lakeview Estates subdivision. That one is 1,240, so it'd be very similar to our projections on what Widmer south of Johnson Drive would be. Some other references throughout the city. 71st Street east of Mize carries about 1,000 cars a day. Mize south of 71st Street carries about 1,000 cars a day. 63rd Street east of Mauer, a little closer to this area, is about 1,200 cars a day. And just to put some things into perspective, like Flum north of Johnson Drive is 6,000 cars a day. Johnson Drive east of Lackman is 8,000 cars a day. And then, of course, something like Shawnee Mission Parkway is about 3,500 cars a day. On a residential street, basically a residential street can handle between 100 and 1,000 cars a day. Collectors, we go from 1,000 up to 10,000 cars a day. So our projections on 1,200 cars, if Widmer would be extended through, would be on the lower side of a collector road at about 1,200 again.
But just in follow-up to that, because I was looking at the cost, because I think the cost is important, because this is not a glaring deficiency right now that poses itself as something the city needs to get out and do. We need to get this done. It's something that's on your planning boards, and you're looking at it as something you'd like to see done. I think we're looking at this situation all across Shawnee, where we've got a lot of roads that end in cul-de-sacs and stubbed and so on. And I know there's an interest in trying to clean up all that kind of stuff, but I'm looking at $1 million price tag when we're trying to examine alternatives for our new fire station down there on 65th and Quivira. We're looking at a lot of things. new community centers. We got a lot of things that people are wanting right now that they're trying to push forward onto the front burner. And this kind of back burner issue, I don't know if I want to see this back burner issue be pushed to the front burner because there's just more projects than there is money right now. So that's my big concern.
Yeah, and we understand it as well. But one of the things, what was recommended in discussions with the developers that, that certain improvements be made now. 62nd Street on the south side of the development, that's one of our narrowest streets out there right now. So it needs some improvement. If some improvements would be made with this development on the east side of Widmer, north of 62nd Street, then that gets us out of our maintenance situation on providing maintenance down to the chalk property, and then by providing right-of-way for an improvement at some point in the future avoids that fire code concern by having more than 30 houses with only one way in and one way out.
Ms. Meyer.
Thank you. I have a question. I realize we can't talk about this specific development, but I'm curious about if the past two developments we've looked at on that property, we were not, as a city, requiring the extension of Widmer. What is the reason maybe for the change now, or was that always kind of the city's conceptual plan and council deviated from that? What prompted the change?
What prompted staff requesting, again, well, certainly at the time Cobblestone came in, it was staff's recommendation that we have Widmer Road. So I wouldn't say that staff's recommendation
That's
has
what I was saying.
changed
So was
any.
it a council change then?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was
there
thinking.
was, at that time, and I think a number of residents were involved in those meetings. And looking back at the meetings, we had a committee meeting that then went to a council meeting, that then there was a neighborhood meeting that went back to a council meeting. So, but again, it was staff's recommendation that we follow our circulation plan, our comprehensive plan. So.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Lindsay.
You mentioned the International Fire Code that says that we need to do this. What are the ramifications if we don't? Is it sort of a suggestion, or I guess how much do we need to stick by that code?
Might need to have the fire chief step in here. There's a number of fire codes related to buildings, but then there's also
I think
part of the
Chief
fire
Maddox
code
is coming to
that
bail you
talks
out.
about, how you provide access to properties, what kind of water lines are to those ramifications. I'll see if the chief can address that.
So, John Maddox, Fire Chief. So we come up against this quite a bit if someone wants to build a subdivision and it has open space adjacent to it, that we're going to put in so many houses with the plan that the street will go through at some time. Well, we can't say, oh no, you got to put the street another mile just so we can get through. So we accept those with the understanding that as development goes on, those connections will be made. So as far as what the ramifications are, we're just still waiting for it to go in. We wouldn't hold up a developer. I think we counted this was 46 homes. I wasn't a part of those subdivisions when they went in. I assume when the second one went in, okay, it's going farther, it'll go through at some point. And so that was just we accepted that. We have others in the city right now that are master plan to go through at some time, and that we sign off and say, okay, we accept that for now, knowing that at some time down the road that those connections will be made. So as far as the ramifications, we can't go back and tell a developer you can't build now. It's too late. So, but those are just some of the things that we accept.
Thank you, Chief Maddox.
You're welcome.
Any more questions from council?
Don't
Mr.
leave,
Neighbor.
Chief. At one point, it seems like, I don't remember whether it was Cobblestone or whether it was Vantage, but the idea that was to put a fire gate at the end of the cul-de-sac.
Correct. And I don't remember which project it was either, but they did bring up at that north end where they would make a connection into their development that would have a gate. So it would be a fire access gate. That's been discussed here. Our concern is it's not going to get maintained. We all walk out the room saying, yeah, it's great. 5 years from now, we get a foot of snow and nobody plowed it. It does us no good. So we're not in favor of that type of a temporary access. And this project wouldn't require it because it has its access points. If I remember, off 62nd and off Flum. It had proper access if that development was to go through. So it wasn't required, the access into this. And the ones before wasn't required, it was offered. So, and I know that's been discussed with this one, but our comment was that, hey, we're just concerned that it'd be a waste of time if it didn't get, who would maintain it 5-10 years from now? So. you bet.
Any more comments from council? Mr. McEnany, did you have some information to share?
I do. My name is Pat McEnany. You need your drawing? I'll go back to that last one you had on there. Yeah, that'd be great. No. There you go. Yeah. Thanks, Doug.
Actually, the whole. Well, that's the whole thing there, yeah.
Yeah, I can see it. Thanks, Doug. Pat McEnany, 222 Arapahoe, Lake Elvira. Born in Shawnee, raised in Shawnee, and our business, McEnany Construction's been here for over 50 years. So I'm part of a development team. Jay McCroy is my partner over there, and his son Billy. And Rick Ingram is one of our consultants who's also doing projects here in Shawnee. And Pat Reagan is involved in this project as well. So you've got some pretty strong, it happens that Jay McCroy is a neighbor over in Widmer Woods. So this development, really, I'm going to talk just for a second to the residents here, because we have a resident as well. I've been in Shawnee all my life, really. Consider Lake Elvira a suburb of Shawnee in some ways. But so let me just say that this is not about the project tonight, okay? But Jay and I very much want to hear what your concerns are about this project. So again, it's not about tonight. Tonight's about Widmer Road. But we are going to develop a senior community product. We think it's going to be excellent. We think it's going to serve very well. Oh, Mike Rickmeyer's here too. He's one of our partners. Didn't see you come in, Mike. We're going to serve the needs of Shawnee. It's an aging community, and my church, St. Joe in Shawnee. The residents, the parishioners there need a product like what we're going to give them. It's going to be 31 villas, 62 units, and 224 multifamily units. It's age restricted. And it's going to be a community within the city of Shawnee. So the plans are being put together, and this is a troubled piece of property in the last few years, obviously, right? And you know that very well. And I appreciate the planning staff bringing this to you tonight. We're a very young development company. We can't afford a long-term look at this project with revisions after revisions after revisions. We want to bring an excellent product to this community, but really tonight is about you deciding on Widmer Road, so that we can move forward with planning and then bring an excellent set of plans in a development project to you. We don't need Widmer Road to go through. You just heard from the fire chief. Our project is not tied to Widmer Estates. Whatever happened there. But we're coming in on the 28.5 acres with the proper ingress, egress, with the proper flow out to Flum Road and 62nd Street. And we have agreed with staff to improve 62nd Street and a portion of Widmer Road. Beyond that, it's not our cause on Widmer Road. It really needs to come to the council, and you folks need to, give your advice at the right time, how you feel about it. But as the development company, we want to build something that's good for the community, but Widmer Road is kind of in your lap, so to speak, to decide. So I'd answer any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you, Mr. McEnany. Any conversations, discussion, questions from council? Mr. Jenkins.
Just one question for you. We did move Widmer, or to complete Widmer Road and connect it, and it's saying here that they're looking for you to put in $300,000 into that. Is that a significant issue for you in your development proposal?
Well, there's some street costs that are pretty significant, and there's also some storm issues that are pretty significant. And those are just in the developing stages, working with planning to work through those issues. But yes, we don't want to be burdened with an issue that really is outside of our needs of this project. So we would, if parts of or all of Widmer go through, we would be looking for some help to offset those costs. I think we're asking for something I believe that's fair.
Thanks.
Mr. Neighbor.
Yes. In listening to this, and I can remember going back, hearing this conversation a couple of other times. I wasn't here in 2008, but I certainly was here for the Vantage. And I understand how the cities, can't pull it back up, but it's a requirement of the city, the new development, to approve any non-standard streets that are adjacent to development that needs to be considered. I believe there's a precedent for this. It was set, and I believe, Mr. Chalk, there were 60, in about 10 years ago this month in January, there were considerable discussions, and if you have the patience to read through the memo, there's 64 pages of verbatim minutes that talk about this very same thing from the people that lived in that area. And the thing is, certainly this council is not tied to what other councils have done. We will do things that perhaps will be changed in the future. But however, I believe there's a precedent there just to leave Widmer the way it is for right now. I think the other is will take care of itself and could be dressed down the road if it needs to. But it certainly doesn't need to be done here for this project as it is envisioned. So I am not in favor of putting the improvements at Widmer at this time.
Stephanie.
Thank you. I would concur with Jim. I think there is a little bit of a precedent with it, and beyond that, it looks like for the purposes of this project, Widmer is not necessary as an exit for that. So I don't see a reason to work on connecting it right now.
Mr. Kemling and then Mr. Jenkins.
I'll go ahead and say, yeah, I agree with both what Jim and Stephanie were saying. At this point in time, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to connect Widmer.
Yes, I was just going to say I concur with those comments as well.
Lindsay.
I agree.
Justin.
Yes.
You got an idea?
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Certainly. All right, I'm going to open this up for questions and comments from the public. Just a show of hands, how many people here have an interest in speaking to the issue of just the road, just Widmer Road? I see 1, 2. Okay, of those people that have your hands up, does anybody here want to speak in favor of bringing Widmer Road through? All right, just trying to get a feel for the lay of the land here. Mr. Chalk, I'm going to give you honors of first presentation.
Thank you. I don't have to say much, okay? I've already heard it, and I appreciate those people speaking that way. The thing that I would like to emphasize, because we do have to vote on it formally at some point down the road, is to please read the 2008 February, just a second, minutes that has my response to the 7 points that the city has made as why we should run Widmer Road through. Please read those. Those council members that have never been down Widmer Road at that place, please come and look. If there's any way possible to develop the property that Mrs. Dudley has, that would be amazing. They need sewer, they need water, and to get water, they got to go across 62nd Street on the southeast corner. The sewer's down in my driveway. Financially impossible, in my opinion. I'm not a developer. Got one over there, he'll tell you the same thing. I have 3 questions to ask, or maybe only 2. Is there currently a right-of-way on the development property on the east side of Widmer Road?
Can we answer that, Doug?
But the developer would need to bring in his survey that would show everything, but if there's not existing right-of-way on their side, then part of their plat would provide half of that right-of-way for the future Widmer Road.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then I want to bring up one piece of history and then I'll quit. Okay? I have in my possession an email that was written in 2014, June 12th of 2014, from a gentleman by the name of Sean Callahan, I think is how you pronounce his last name. It's spelled C-A-H-A-L-A-N. He is a deputy county surveyor. He wrote a memo to Ron Hooper, who I don't know whether he still works for the city or not. Okay. But this is the memo that he wrote to him. He said, here are the road records for Widmer Road from 62nd Street North. Here's a short story of what I've been able to find in the records. Mr. E.L. Thompson bought, and instead of giving you the legal description, it's my place, Widmer Woods, and Timber Oaks, which my parents bought in 1948 and owned that 40 acres. I still live there. The property was landlocked, so on April the 9th, 1909, he petitioned for a road to access it. The petition originally asked for the road to run on the 1/16th line of the property, but the viewers, and that's what they called the people to go out and look, decided to run it all on the west side of the line because of a hedgerow that was in the line. By the way, those hedge trees are still there, and there are some that are 110 years old. He said, I did a thorough search of our records and could find no record of any petition for or dedication of any right-of-way on the east side of the line. We had a motion here before the city at one point in time to vacate the east side. Okay. Anyway, he said, I can't explain the 20-foot of right-of-way shown on the east side of the county engineer's atlas. I can't say for sure, but it appears to be in error at this point. I could also find no record of a vacation of the Thompson Road. That makes sense, since it apparently has been in continuous use since its opening.
And Mr.
I
Chuck,
make my point on this is because we've had many discussions about whether or not there was a right-of-way on the east side.
thank you.
Widmer Road in that section goes from 62nd Street all the way down to my property, and it's 20 foot wide.
Thank you, Mr. Chuck.
Travel.
Your time is up.
Please come look.
Thank you. Mr. Neighbor?
Just to, it's page, what you mentioned, those 7 items are on page 61 of tonight's
Yes, sir.
agenda, or our
Page over,
package,
page
yeah.
61, page 62.
Right.
Thank you.
Any more comments from the public? Yes, please come forward. State your name and your address. You have 5 minutes.
My name is Melissa Nachbar. I live at 14101 West 61st Street in Widmer Woods, and I've lived there for 24 years. We're thrilled with the proposed project, so we are not here because of that. We're very happy. We do not want Widmer to go through. My huge concern is once the public finds out that you could cut through from Johnson Drive all the way to Shawnee Mission Parkway, we're going to have the Indianapolis 500 going through our neighborhood. I wouldn't directly be affected as much as the people right on Widmer because I live up the hill. But I would not be able to get out of my street, for that matter. And I know you've been there, Mr. Zimmerman, up our street. So if you can imagine, once everybody finds out you can cut through to get to Hy-Vee, to get to Shawnee Mission Parkway, we would have a madhouse. And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you. Any more questions, comments from the public? Yes, sir. Please come forward, state your name and your address.
Hi, I'm Scott Carmichael, 5920 Widmer. Just to state my agreement about a cut-through street, I live in a cut-through street, and it was very dangerous for children. We had speed bumps put in. The fire department didn't like those. They tore them out. I was very glad to get out of that neighborhood. I moved to this neighborhood, felt like it was safe for children. My children are grown. Neighborhood's turning over, though. Young families moving in. So I see a lot of danger with, so please consider, beside the doubling the volume, the speed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments from the public? Yes, sir. Please step forward, state your name, your address. You have 5 minutes.
My name is Kelly Olovach. I live at 6016 Widmer. And I don't know, Doug, can you get the map that has the red line on it? I'm at the top of the Widmer Drive.
You're on the, he's the last house.
On the corner of the cul-de-sac.
Right, temporary cul-de-sac.
Yes, temporary, excuse me. We would probably be more directly affected than anyone would because of that proposed through street. That's about I believe, 16% grade going up beside our house up the hill. And if you look out our backyard, if you will, the key at the bottom of our property up the top of the hill is probably a 22-foot incline. Well, there's going to be a lot more cost than just the street itself. You would have to put a block wall to block up because of erosion. If you cut that from the fence line in 12 feet to make the proposed 22-foot wide street. So you're going to have a lot of erosion down the side of that hill from the proposed development, which would be a real issue. Plus, the only access from that 2 to 2.5 block drive down Widmer Drive would be Roger Chalk's property. So you've got a racetrack coming down from 62nd all the way down to the temporary cul-de-sac if that happened. So we see a real issue with safety and, as far as our property, issues, because it would go right through our backyard, basically. But here again, I have an issue with the city spending $1 million for that little two-block road, spending taxpayers $700,000 for that little proposed part of the road, when in the previous years, the neighbors to the north of Widmer that have the drain-off creek going through their backyard from the overflow of the pond on the hill where the development is proposed, haven't been able to get that proposed dig out of that creek from the city, which, would be a lot less expensive and save a lot of property values from the back of their homes being flooded every time it rains. So I see that trying to propose this road and spending that kind of money is not very responsible as far as taxpayers concerned. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more? Yes. Please come forward, state your name, your address. You have 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Susan Trimble, and we are at 6005 Widmer, right at the bottom of the hill that goes down. We moved in a year and a half ago, and absolutely love the neighborhood. And there's 2 comments I'd like to make. One is, whatever is done, be it a development, which we are much in favor of, or a road, to consider the water problems that we are facing on Widmer Road. This past summer, those 2 or 3 torrential rains we had, all of us that were on that road were threatened that the water would be up so high it would come into our homes. I am concerned what would happen to the dam and the pond that is across from where Kelly is, anything that you do. The second comment I would make is that I would propose that you consider making Widmer a permanent roundabout turnaround. I'm sure it would cost a lot less than $1 million. And then be done with all this. No more discussion. It'd sure make our neighborhood happy. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Any more comments from the public? All right, we're going to move on to item number 4.
So just for clarification, then we have consensus from all of you that we are not going to have the developer proceed with putting Widmer Road through.
Correct.
Okay.
Final item for this evening is to discuss the outdoor warning siren replacement program. In July 2015, the governing body approved a multi-year replacement program of 2 outdoor warning sirens per year. Staff is recommending replacing 8 outdoor warning sirens in 2018. Emergency Services Manager Matt Epperson will make a presentation. Mr. Epperson.
Thank you. Matt Epperson, Emergency Services Chief with the Fire Department. To give you a little background on this, back in 2014, 2015, we had Blue Valley Public Safety, who is our siren vendor, come through and do an audit of all our sirens. At the time, we realized that about 2/3 of our sirens did not meet the current standards. And so at that time, we came up with a replacement plan, which we had proposed to the council and was approved at the time. At the time, we decided we were going to replace 2 sirens a year for 6 years for a total of 12 sirens. We started that replacement project in 2016 and followed through in 2017. And to this date, we've replaced 4 sirens. What we are concerned about is that the remaining 8 sirens do not meet the current standards. We have several issues. They're getting hard to find parts for when they do need repairs. And one of the biggest problems that is really urging us to push up our timeline was the Dallas siren hacking incident that happened in April of 2017. And basically what happened there is somebody was able to use radio signals to set off the sirens, 156 sirens in Dallas, over a 4-hour period. And essentially it locked up 911 because about 4,000 calls were made to 911, which then delayed any further help when people truly needed help. And what we found out when we did our audit was that the 8 sirens that we have are not capable of being encrypted, and thereby they are susceptible to that hacking. So what we have right now is we have 19 sirens. As I said, 8 don't meet the current standards. The proposal is to actually reduce that to 18 sirens, but we want to relocate and replace 8 of those sirens. By relocating some of those sirens and replacing the other ones, it will actually provide us better coverage than what we have right now, reduce our inventory, and protect us from any potential hacking, I should say. So basically what we're looking at, and I've got some maps to kind of show you what we're talking about. So the map's kind of stressed a little bit, but this is our current inventory right now. And you can see that we do have some gaps in coverage. What I have on here is only the sirens that are owned by the city. So there is a small siren in Lake Quivira that provides some coverage. There is a siren, which you'll see on the next map, at Shawnee Mission Park that also covers some of that ground. But you can see some of the smaller circles, everything, those are the older sirens that just don't provide as much coverage. The new siren would actually increase that coverage. And then this next map shows basically what we would gain by upgrading these and relocating them to a few new areas. You can see we've got almost 100% coverage, and again, we'll be better protected and be able to provide the citizens of Shawnee better warning for tornadoes and other severe storms. So with that in mind, basically what we had was, obviously we had 2 sirens in the budget for this year. If you saw the packet memo last year, that would have equaled about $58,000. Basically the proposal would be to add the additional 6 sirens this year, which would, on top of the $58,000, would be an additional $167,000 and change. And we, in looking at funding sources for that, we have a few ideas. One of those is the new county sales tax for the county courthouse, which right now I believe is not being used to fund anything else at this time. So that is the proposal. And I guess at this time, do you have any questions?
All right, Ms. Meyer.
Yeah, thank you. Less of a question, more of a statement. I think this is a great idea. I appreciate you guys doing that. And I think when we initially talked about the courthouse sales tax, we were kind of having the debate about whether or not it should be used for public safety. And I favor that. And this falls well into that category. So good thought. Thank you.
Mr. Neighbor, and
I
then Mr.
concur with
Jenkins.
Stephanie's comments.
Mr. Jenkins.
Well, you know, I feel I spent over 30 years in emergency management and protecting public safety, so obviously I'm very much in favor of this. And I'm also very much in favor of using the tax money from the public safety initiative that was passed by the county, because I was very strong on that. I came out very strong on saying that's where that's where the public safety project should be funded from. So this is great, and I fully endorse it.
Mr. Adrian.
I would concur with everyone that's spoken. I think it's a great idea. I think it's important to upgrade our services. I don't want a Dallas situation to happen here in Shawnee. Not that it would, but I can only imagine what would happen if that did occur. So thank you for the presentation.
Any more comments from council? Any comments from the public? All right, the recommended action is consider affording the replacement of 8 outdoor warning sirens in 2018 for a cost of $223,441.60, and a recommendation for funding to the governing body for approval. I'll accept a motion.
Hearing no further comments from the attendees or the council, I'd make a motion that we fund the 8 sirens as presented by our emergency management official, and also would like to say that it should be funded from the county court sales tax.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Unanimous decision? All right, I believe that concludes everything on the agenda for tonight. I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Adjourned.